everyone's stronger together than one.
have people in the seats that what will. So this is an interesting conversation. I kind of wanted a witnessed conversation, if you will, between these two gentlemen who think about things, I think, in an interesting way. I want to introduce each of them. Give me a minute. So first, let me introduce my colleague at Gable Associates, Mike Bergotti. So Mike is sitting here with the fancy socks. Mike leads Gable Associates, Wholesale Power and Market Services Group. His multidisciplinary team navigates complex markets, operations, and planning constructs to advance our clients' interests in wholesale markets and non-market areas throughout the United States. Mike has held multiple leadership positions within ISO and RTO stakeholder processes, including he was the chair of PJM's Members Committee and a voting member of the nominating committee that recommends candidates for PJM boards of managers. No doubt you've been hearing a lot about PJM in the recent few months. Mike is going to try to pull the curtain back on that a little bit. Our other panelist is, I guess I could say doctor, Shihab Curran. So it's a little, you've done a lot of interesting things, and I have to kind of pick and choose about what to highlight with you. But let me start with a little, just I guess, local experience. First of all, right now, he is an investor, generally, an investor, serial entrepreneur, director, and a fairly seasoned executive in the semiconductor, power, and clean tech sectors. His efforts are fueled by a vision for a peaceful world with universal access to clean and sustainable sources of energy, water, and food. Shihab actually founded EV Edison and Power Edison, which are two companies that are operating very innovative stationary and mobile energy storage solutions for the grid. His previous roles, including President of Strategic Development at NRG, he was also President of Advanced Solutions at Sun Edison. And in 2006, I think when I first became aware of you, he founded Petra Solar. And you may be familiar with Petra Solar because if you look up on poles and you see solar panels, that was the company that did that. Fairly highly distributed power plant on utility poles, pretty innovative. So we wanted to have a conversation today to talk a little bit about some of the tools and opportunities that might exist when we think about the RTOs, PJM in particular in this region. Also, how the PJM interfaces with the utilities. These have been, for a long time, acting separate entities. But the world is changing, and the energy markets are becoming more complicated. And these things, Mike and I are always talking about this, these things are starting to bleed into each other. And so I don't want to lead too much. I have a bunch of questions that I can ask you. But what I think I'd like to do to start is ask each of you to open with some remarks about transportation being kind of the tip of the spear that may be driving some change in how these markets are organized. And then we can get into some ideas you guys might have for how to maybe liberate value, create markets, and accelerate this using the kinds of tools you guys are aware of and deal with. Mike?
No, thank you very much for that, Pam. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you so much, Shihab, for joining me today. Before we jump into substance, maybe I'll spend 2 minutes just describing what a PJM is. It's 3 funny letters that we hear a lot. It gets brought up in lots of contexts, but it's actually a pretty incredible entity organization. So PJM is what's called a regional transmission organization. And it is a utility that is regulated by the federal government in a 13-state territory that stretches all the way from the border between New York and Pennsylvania, New Jersey, sort of west to Michigan, and south to the North Carolina-Virginia border. So it's an enormous place, 13 states in the District of Columbia, across roughly a 300 million mile service territory thereabouts. Chicago is in PJM, Washington DC, Philadelphia, all sorts of places like that. And they do a couple of different things. They are planning, designing, and operating the transmission grid on behalf of all of the utilities in that service territory. So things like connecting new generators to the grid or building transmission infrastructure to feed EV load. These are kinds of core competencies that they are managing across that whole footprint. The other thing that they do is that since the better part of the 1990s, the policy on the federal government side has been to use competition to drive the lowest power prices that you can. And PJM runs a series of competitive markets where people buy and sell power the same way, say, you might buy and sell frozen orange juice concentrate or pork bellies on a commodity exchange like ICE or like CME. And so what's really exciting about PJM, if you think about this from a vehicle mobility standpoint, is that while the policies in states can differ dramatically between a West Virginia, a New Jersey, or a Michigan, the way that you can interface with PJM, the policies that apply to how they plan their grid or run their markets are uniform across that whole area. And that provides an incredible opportunity for innovation and for folks to be able to leverage the value of those markets as we start to think about vehicle electrification.
Thank you, Pam, and thanks everyone for having us today. The topic of PJM and market products can be deep and technical and complex, but we'll take it up and down as everyone here likes to have it. PJM, Mike just mentioned something. It's a market where people buy and sell energy. And what's unique about that is that we are talking about EVs today, and it happens, what makes an EV an EV is the battery in the vehicle. And it happens to be the technology that can buy and sell as the same asset. So a solar panel can only sell, a load can only buy, but the battery in a vehicle can buy and sell. And the rules that have been written around for almost 100 years, and then more recently in the last 20 years, with the deregulation, have been written around either you're a buyer or you're a seller. Well, what if I'm both? And that's what the opportunity of battery storage presents. And you can call vehicles mobile batteries. We have a business called Power Edison focused on mobile batteries. So we study this deeply and we build equipment here in New Jersey. And so that can take us to very interesting places. How is that? Any cost associated with markets, products, buying, selling, eventually is borne by one entity called the ratepayers. It's us who pay the electricity bill at the end of the day or at the end of the month. So the market design and what say the BTU gets engaged in and the regulated utilities and non-regulated entities, there's a cost to every activity. And we pay that. And so we can advance the energy transition, we can reduce the cost, sometimes through market design, in addition to product and technologies. And I think we have an amazing opportunity with electric vehicles to bring the cost down while at the same time electrifying the sector and helping the environment.
I agree with that entirely, and I think that's really well said, that electric vehicles can both be a consumer of power and a provider of power. That's a really important function for the grid, right? Unlike other systems, power always has to be in balance. If you don't have enough electricity to serve demand, we know what that's called. It's called a blackout. Those make us sad. We don't want those, right? But by the same token, if you don't have enough demand to use the energy that the power plants are producing at a particular period of time, you have to turn those plants off, right? Or you risk damaging the grid in that way. And so we are really at an apex point here. Some of these systems, like California and Texas, have gotten really good at managing large utility scale batteries, but we're just beginning to sort of conceptualize that concept in these markets of peak demand and generation at the same time. And the way that I think about this from like sort of an innovation, like kind of big picture perspective to say like what could the opportunity look like, I think that it's fair to say that you can imagine a universe where you could allow folks to monetize the value of their vehicles in the way that Uber allowed folks to monetize the value of their vehicles through the gig economy, right? When you're not using your car and it is sitting in the parking lot at your office or in the garage of your house, it can be literally selling power or selling demand to the grid, and you could be getting compensated for that, right? And that could be something that happens infrequently. That could be something that happens for some of us more frequently than that. And so in addition to being able to manage the charges and the costs that are associated with owning that car, it also allows you to expand the opportunities to monetize that value to actually get paid for it. And if you think about that across the number of vehicles that span between Michigan, North Carolina, and effectively the New Jersey, New York border, the opportunity is huge, right? The ability to access those revenues is tremendous, and we're right at that apex point where we're beginning to see those kinds of strategies develop.
Yeah, so PGM is at any point in time solving for two things. It solves